Everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Yevamot. This is our 11th class, and we are going to be reviewing Daf 72 to Daf 78. And Lynn put in our chat, yes, Yom Yerushalayim is coming up on Sunday, so it is a very important day. I'm actually wearing blue and white today, so we can celebrate that. Okay, as we start today's lesson, it is important to understand there are a number of sensitive issues in this week's class. One is the Gemara does discuss many different male genital injuries or we'll say injuries or different cases. I am not going to go through the anatomy of all of these things. So I will summarize as I usually do. And if anybody is interested in exact details, they can look it up and I will mention what daf. Okay, and then as we get to other things, we'll mention other things. Okay, so this week, Daf 72, we ended last week discussing that the Jewish people in the desert did not do Brit Milah. They did not get circumcised. And there were questions why they didn't get circumcised. Maybe it was because they were weak from the journey, or maybe the Daf continues on 72, telling us that there was this wind, this northern wind that blew every night in the desert, and therefore either the wind was good for them or it wasn't good for them, but the bottom line is that they did not do circumcision while in the desert, and that's why we read about in the beginning of the book of Yehoshua, of Joshua, we have the nation as a whole doing circumcision, doing Brit Milah before they do Korban Pesach, which we actually mentioned in Masechet Pesachim. The Gemara then goes on to discussing a man, what's called mashuch, which means that the person was circumcised, but then the skin grew back. Either it was pulled over, or grew back. The Gemara tells us that biblically that man can eat truma. Again, we're going to discuss. Again, to eat truma, which is sanctified, you need to be circumcised. The question is this person who was circumcised, but at this moment not anymore, biblically he can eat truma, but rabbinically we say no. Rabbinically, they actually have to do another procedure in order to, complete the circumcision. There's a description that during the time of Bar Kokhba, of the Jewish rebellion after the destruction of the Second Temple, the Romans didn't let the Jews do circumcision, and the ones who had been circumcised, they actually made them reverse it. And therefore, when Bar Kokhba rebelled, he actually had them all do the circumcision again. From here, since we're talking about eating truma, again, as I mentioned, you need to be circumcised. We're going to get to the two categories of people that are ambiguous in terms of their genital organs. So we have the tumtum, which means that the genitalia are covered. We don't know exactly what they are, or we can't circumcise something that isn't there. So the tumtum cannot eat truma, but his wife and his children can. The androgynous, which means a person who has both sexual organs, can eat truma, but not sacrificial meat. And the mashuch, the one who was maybe either born circumcised or was circumcised but now isn't, can also eat truma. Then the Gemara says, wait a minute, the tumtum has a wife. So the Gemara explains that if he has recognizable male genitalia, then he could be married to a woman, or maybe we're not talking about his wife, but maybe we're talking about his mother, that he allows his mother to eat truma. Then, as we said, biblically, deoraita, you need to do circumcision, brit milah, during the day. And also, right, we know a child after 8 days also does, right, the child at 8 days should do the brit milah during the day. Even after 8 days, the child should also still have the brit milah on the 8th day. Since we're talking about what a person who does not have a circumcision, what he can or cannot do, again, the term is arel. Arel means uncircumcised. And here the discussion is really, when we're discussing an arel here, we mean a Jewish male who, for medical reasons, cannot have a brit milah, right? It's not someone who decides that they do not want circumcision, but it means someone who wanted to but just can't medically, meaning it's dangerous for them. The Gemara brought up a case of right, hemophilia, where the 2 other siblings before him died, or 3. So this person can sprinkle others with the ashes and the water of the red heifer, of the para aduma. And so then the question is, we say that the arel, the person who is not circumcised, cannot do kiddushin, right? Cannot betroth another person. We're talking about maybe the tumtum, who we're not sure if they're male or female. There's actually a machloket if androgynous can be mekadesh, right? And androgynous is both male and female. We see that the uncircumcised person is exempt from going to Yerushalayim 3 times a year, from bringing the sacrifice, the korban re'iyah that we mentioned previously in Masechet Chagiga. And Daf 73 asks, can the uncircumcised person eat maaser sheni? Now, we mentioned truma, which we know is sanctified. Maaser sheni, right, the second tithe, was something that was done in certain years out of a 7-year cycle, year 1, 2, and then 4 and 5. What happened was this tithe was for you to eat, meaning you separated the tithe. You needed to take that food to Jerusalem and eat it in Jerusalem. So on one hand, it has a certain sanctity because you need to eat it in Jerusalem. On the other hand, it is yours. So here the Gemara asks, right? Can the uncircumcised person eat from maaser sheni? So we're going to see if maybe we can learn from the onen. Onen was the person who's in the most intense mourning period, which is before burial, before the funeral. That person is an onen. The onen cannot eat maaser sheni, so maybe the uncircumcised person also cannot. And then the Gemara says, well, maybe that we can compare it. Let's look at truma and bikurim, right? Truma, we know, is the gift given to the priest. Bikurim are the first fruits that are brought to the temple. A non-Kohen cannot eat truma or bikurim, and it's seen as the property of the Kohen, and you need to be you need to be pure, tahor, in order to eat it, but not maaser, right? It doesn't mention whether or not the arel can eat it, and it was left out. So maybe we can learn from here that the arel can eat maaser. But the Gemara says, no, well, bikurim, right, the first fruits and maaser sheni need to be brought to Jerusalem. So maybe we should compare those two. And it can't be burned if it becomes impure. And those are things that were left out of this long list. Therefore, the Gemara concludes that the arel, the uncircumcised, can eat maaser sheni. Maaser sheni and the bikurim, the first fruits, are forbidden for the onen to eat. Again, the person who is in mourning before burial. And this is based on a verse. And it seems like, right, maybe truma would be okay, and then maybe bikurim would also be okay. So that was the discussion in the Gemara on Daf 73. If you do eat it when you are impure, you actually get lashes. So the Gemara explains what does it mean when you eat it when impure? What is impure? The Gemara explains either the actual food or the person, right? Either way, one of them is impure. Then that is you are forbidden to eat the maaser sheni, right? Maaser sheni cannot be eaten if it itself is impure, and it cannot be burned if it becomes impure. Truma, on the other hand, can be burnt if it becomes impure, meaning if you have truma oil, you can't eat it, but you can use it as lamp oil, like to burn it in your house. And if it's something is kodesh, meaning completely sanctified, if it becomes impure, you cannot burn it. And therefore, right, and here there's a discussion of what's more severe. Kodesh, which is right something sanctified in terms of maybe sacrificial meat, things like that. And the Gemara says it has like an acronym of why Kodesh, sanctified things, are more severe. And the acronym is pancakes. It doesn't say it that way, but it's funny to read it that way. But basically, it means I'll read it right. Pigul, notar, korban, me'ilah, karet, asur, leonen. What are all those things? Right? Something that is kodesh. You can ruin it with your thought. That's pigul. Notar, you're not allowed to leave it over. It is a korban. It's a sacrifice. Me'ilah is if you misappropriate it. It's as if you're stealing from God. Karet, right? If you eat it in an improper way, you will get karet. And asur, leonen, again, the mourner cannot eat it. Truma only gets the acronym of machpaz, not as fun as pancakes. But what is that acronym? Mita, again, chomesh. If you eat truma, you have to pay it back. Ein pidyon, you cannot redeem it, and asur lizarim, it's not allowed for strangers, meaning truma is only eaten from by priests. But we see that truma is less stringent in the sense that it only has 4 things, as opposed to kodesh, which had 6 things. So we see that sacrificial items are more sanctified than truma. Okay, Daf 74 tells us, as I mentioned, Maaser Sheni is only brought on year 1, 2, 4, and 5. Just so you should know, year 3 and 6 is what's called Maaser Ani. You give that tithe to the poor people. And of course, on year 7, like this year, is Shemitah. Everything is free or not owned, and therefore everyone can eat from everything, right? Truma and bikurim, the first fruits, those are brought every year. So we see that truma and bikurim, again, if we're talking about what should be more stringent, we said kodesh is at the top, truma and bikurim are next, maaser sheni is on a lower level, therefore we're going to say that maybe the arel can eat it. A person without a full circumcision can't eat it. And again, the question is, what are we talking about? Is it maaser? Is it maybe maaser behema, which is the tithe of the animals? Maybe we're talking about maaser rishon. And the arel, the uncircumcised, cannot eat 2 types of maaser. again, the question is what two types? Maybe we're talking about tithes from grain and maaser sheni, or no, maybe we're talking about the original tithe maaser rishon. An onen, someone who is in mourning, again before burial, cannot burn the red heifer, the para aduma. This seems to be in disagreement with Rabbi Akiva. And here there's a link, a gzeira shava, a linkage between Maaser Sheni and Pesach. Again, here we say that actually both are forbidden for the arel to eat. If you remember, when we learned Masechet Pesachim, we mentioned that in order to eat Pesachim, a man needed to be circumcised. Okay. From here, the Gemara continues and tells us that what are the different things that a person can eat when they are impure and then when they become pure. So what happens is that a person who is impure, again, sometimes we're talking about a 1 day process. That's much simpler. But let's say we're talking about someone who is impure for 7 days. Let's say the Zav who had, let's say, 3 unnatural emissions, 3 in a row, he now is tameh. He has to count 7 clean days, and then he goes to the mikvah, and then on the 8th day, he brings a sacrifice. So the Gemara teaches us that he becomes pure on the 7th day when he goes to the mikvah. Then what's called ha'erev shemesh, at night, when the sun sets, he now becomes purified. And then on the 8th day, when he brings the korban, he is more purified. So what does that mean? On day 7, when he goes to the mikvah, now he can eat maaser right away. Then that night, when the sun sets, he can now eat truma. And then on the 8th day, meaning the next morning, when he wakes up, he brings a sacrifice. Now he can eat kodshim. Now he can eat the sacrificial meat. So we see a progression of purity and different levels of purity needed for consumption of different things. Right, at each stage, you can eat something else. Right, and each one is more stringent than the next. From here, the Gemara mentions also that since we're talking about people who are impure for a longer period of time and then they have to bring a sacrifice, a Jewish woman who is going through childbirth, she becomes impure. She's called a yoledet, a woman who gave birth. And then after that process, she also becomes purified through going to the mikvah, and then she brings a sacrifice as well. Daf 75 teaches us that there are 3 verses that teach that an impure priest cannot eat truma till he goes to the mikvah, and he has to wait till the sun sets. What we said, ha'arev shemesh, that night he can eat truma. There are 2 verses that teach that an impure person cannot eat sacrificial meat, kodshim, till the next day. As we mentioned on day 8, when they bring their sacrifice, that's when they can eat. The sacrificial meat. You can't even touch the truma till the evening after you go to the mikvah. Okay, from here, we're going to now discuss different injuries of the male genitalia. Here, it's referred to as what's called Patsua Daka, which means there's some sort of injury. The Gemara will discuss what those injuries are. So first, the Gemara tells us that if a woman is married to a man who has this injury, and again, this man is not really supposed to be married, but let's say the injury happened after they were married, and then they didn't have relations since he was injured. These relations are called invalidating relations. If they didn't have relations, then she can still eat truma because again, let's say the case is that he is a kohen, a priest. She's been eating truma the whole time. Now he sustained this injury. She can continue eating the truma because she already was eating it beforehand. From here, again, those of you who are interested, on Daf 75, there are many detailed descriptions of male genital injuries, partial, complete, where if you are curious, you can go look there. I just, yeah. But we will discuss what's called two different types of, I guess, really, you would say, someone who's sterile or like a eunuch, right? There are two phrases. One is called saris chama. Saris chama means someone who became sterile through either an injury, sorry, excuse me, not an injury, an illness, or right there, meaning that outwardly there is no change, but inside they are no longer able to reproduce. So the Gemara says that if someone is sterile because of, I guess I would call it natural causes in the sense of illness, meaning there was no injury. So then they can marry somebody, just not what's called saris bnei adam, which means someone either caused that injury or there was just there was an injury, but meaning now there is again a physical change to the male genitalia. That would be problematic. From here, the Gemara describes three parts of the male genital anatomy. All of those parts need to be intact. If there is a wound in the area, if it's a majority of the area, then that would be problematic. And again, the Gemara at the top of Daf 76 describes different wounds to the area, and then different ways to check if the wound is problematic. Different types of, like, if there is a hole somewhere, if there's a hole and then it gets sealed up, then that would be okay. That's seen as being healed. The Gemara describes how to seal that hole. It is quite vivid description. I would say males should not read it. I don't know, anyone should. It involved scratching and making scar tissue and an ant and its head, and I don't know. Okay, whatever. Anyway, okay. The next Mishnah on Daf 76 tells us that men with genital wounds can marry converts or free slaves. They are not considered part of Kahal Yisrael. And again, as I mentioned, we're now going to talk in a minute about conversion, and I think it is very important to understand. We're going to talk about the we'll get there, and then we'll talk about it. So the Gemara, so that was the Mishnah. The Gemara says, can a man who a kohen who has these wounds, can they marry a convert and a free slave? Again, maybe they weren't supposed to in the first place. Right? Is he considered sanctified like all the priests, and then therefore he cannot marry them? Or is he not seen as sanctified because he has this wound? The Gemara tells us that with these wounds, you can marry a netin. We'll see what the netin is in a few minutes. And again, they're not supposed to have children, or they can't have children, so therefore maybe they can marry each other. One second. So the Gemara says, well, you can't, the Gemara tells us on Daf 76 that you cannot biblically marry a non-Jew because It doesn't, meaning there's no halachic way to marry a non-Jew. Then the Gemara says, but wait a minute, didn't Shlomo, the King Solomon, marry Bat Paro? She's an Egyptian. So the Gemara says, oh no, it's okay. He converted her. But then the Gemara says, wait a minute, didn't we learn that you were not allowed to accept converts in the time of Shlomo? The Gemara says she was different. Again, the reason they didn't accept converts in that time was because they were afraid, right? It was so prosperous. It was such a good time to be a Jew. So then they didn't want to accept more Jews at that time. They thought they would be doing it for the wrong reasons. The Gemara says, well, Bat Paro, she's a princess. She has all the money she needs. So she's not doing it for the wrong reasons. Of course, she is doing it to marry Shlomo, but okay. And then the Gemara says, but wait a minute, aren't Egyptians not allowed to convert till the third generation? And that's actually going to be the rest of our discussion. The Gemara says, oh, okay, you're right. And really, no, Shlomo did not marry her. He just loved her so much that it describes her as being married, but really they never got married. The next Mishnah on Daf 76 tells us about different nations who are not allowed to convert to Judaism. So now it's just important to understand these nations existed in the time of the Torah, in the time already not in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara. There's a whole discussion about that. And basically, I think the idea really is that this is not really applicable nowadays. And we have discussed this before, the importance of accepting all people, people who convert with sincerity. And I think that that is very, very important. That being said, the Gemara now is going to talk about these nations that are basically being punished for the way they treated the Jewish people. And therefore, they're not allowed to convert to Judaism. So the Mishnah tells us Ammoni and Moavi, meaning the males from the nation of Ammon and Moab are not allowed to convert. The females can. And again, this is very important because of especially since Shavuot is next week, we're going to read the famous story of Ruth. Ruth is from Moab. And now if you would say that we do not accept converts from Moab, how could it be that Ruth, right, marries Boaz, and she is the great-grandmother of King David, of David HaMelech, and therefore, right, the Gemara is very insistent in telling us that the males are not allowed to convert, but the women are allowed to convert, and we'll see why in a minute. The Egyptians and the Edomites, the Edomi, are not allowed to convert for 2 generations, but the third generation, male or female, are accepted for conversion. There is an opinion in the Mishnah that the females can convert right away, and this was given as a tradition that was passed down. The Gemara says that right, there's a conversation with Shaul, who asks, who is David? Right, and it's a very strange thing because David is about to go fight Goliath, the giant, but we know that David has been playing music in the court of Shaul for the past whatever it is, definitely a chapter. So the Gemara is asking, like, this is a really strange question to ask. Why David is not here? Who is David? Because we know Shaul knows who David is, and the Gemara says he's really asking about his lineage, right? Does he come from Peretz? Does he come from Peretz, who, again, the word Peretz means lifrot, to break through, right? He's the first twin born from Tamar. Peretz, right, is destined for kingship. He broke through. Or does he come from Zerach, who is important but not a king? And the Gemara continues and tells us that Saul's armor fit David perfectly, which is miraculous. And therefore, Shaul realized that David is a very special person, and that's why he was asking about him. So Doeg, who we know is generally the bad guy, he's always trying to cause trouble. So Doeg says, oh yeah, he's a descendant from Ruth HaMoaviyah, right? Ruth, who was originally from Moab. Maybe he's not even Jewish, right? You're worried he's going to take away the monarchy. Maybe he's not even Jewish. And here at that moment, right, they said, right, Moavi velo Moaviyah. The male Moabite is not allowed to convert, but the female is allowed. And now the question is why? So the Gemara explains that when the Jewish people passed the Ammon and Moab, the two nations in the desert, they asked for bread and water, and they refused to give them any sustenance, anything, not even bread and water. And the Gemara says that it was the men who should have brought out the bread and water, and therefore they're not allowed to convert, but the women can convert. Right? But then the Doeg says, wait a minute. Maybe the women should have brought out food, right? What do you mean the women are exempt? They could have brought out the food. So the top of 77 tells us that, again, nobody really knew the answer or how to answer Doeg, and he went to the Beit Midrash and he learned, and there they said, again, Ammoni velo Ammonit, the same idea that it's the males and not the females. And then the Gemara says, wait a minute, what's the answer, right? The truth is the women didn't go out. So why is that the case? So the Gemara says, right, women shouldn't go out. It's not appropriate for women to go out, and therefore the women are from Ammon and Moab are allowed to convert. And the proof brought, or another example brought, is Sarah, right? When the three angels come to Abraham and Sarah, right? They ask Abraham, where is your wife? And he says, she's in the tent. And here a very famous line is mentioned, Kol kvoda bat melech pnima, right? The honor of the princess is inside, right? Meaning the women are, I think this line is used, it's from Tehillim, it's usually taught in the framework of modesty, right? The princess, right? Every Jewish girl is like a princess, and she should stay in the palace, away from other people. It's an interesting read. Again, I think it's talking about a certain time when women did not go out into public as much. We definitely see that in halachic works throughout history. I would say that nowadays that is less applicable. But I think this idea that all women are like princesses and maybe should be modest is, okay, great. Let's continue in the Gemara. The Gemara, since we're talking about David HaMelech and we mentioned some Tehillim, let's go through other verses in Tehillim where David says, right, Pitachta lemoserai, we say this in Hallel, you opened up my straps, the things holding me down. What are these straps? The Gemara explains Ruth and Naamah, right? Ruth was, again, we said David's great-grandmother, and his daughter-in-law, Naamah, is a convert from Ammon, right? She married Shlomo, and they had Rechavam together. And basically, David is thanking God that he allowed those women into the Jewish people. Right? David hints David says that he's hinted to in the Chumash, in the story of Lot and his two daughters. Again, interestingly, the two daughters of Lot are the progenitors of Ammon and Moab. They're, right, the mothers of Ammon and Moab. And when describing the two daughters, it says that they were found, nimtsaot, they were there. And so to David is nimtsa, he's also found. So he says it's almost like a foreshadowing already in the Chumash. The Gemara tells us that the daughter of an Ammoni convert can marry a priest. Now, we just said an Ammoni, a male from Ammon, is not allowed to convert. But interestingly, the Gemara says that his daughter is seen as a full-fledged Jew and can even marry a priest. So the question is, who is the mother, right? We know who the father is. We don't know who the mother is. Maybe we're talking about the daughter of two converts, right? Both are from Ammon. Again, the mother who's from Ammon is a full-fledged Jew, so her daughter is valid. The Gemara says maybe we're talking about people from two separate nations, and maybe we're talking about a Ammoni, a male Ammoni convert, and a regular Jewish woman. And even though he wasn't supposed to convert, the daughter is still seen as Jewish, full-fledged, and can even marry a priest. Now, what about the Egyptian and the Edomites, right? Mitzri and Edomi. We said that it's male and female cannot convert till the third generation, but we said maybe the females can. And as we said, it's a machloket. Maybe we should learn from all prohibited relationships, the arayot. Those are male and female, and also for 3 generations. But we say no, because that has a very severe punishment. This is less severe. Maybe we can learn from mamzer, which cannot marry again into Judaism, marry a Jew, male or female. And therefore, maybe the Mitzri, the Egyptian, and the Edomite are male and female, are equally cannot convert. And we say, right, basically the sages, the Chachamim, say that both the male and female cannot convert till that third generation. Rabbi Shimon says he has a tradition from going back to Moshe that they can convert, that the females can convert. And Rabbi Yehuda says that even a woman cannot marry till the third generation. Daf 78 tells us that a second generation Egyptian convert can marry a second generation female Egyptian convert, and then their child will be third generation and will be completely Jewish and totally fine. Or maybe the case is that this second generation male Egyptian marries a Jewish woman, which he's not supposed to do, but the child is still fine when the child of that relationship. And the Gemara says, wait a minute, why are you teaching it from a forbidden relationship? We want to learn it from a permitted relationship, and therefore that permitted relationship is the Egyptian male and female. They're both second generation, and then that's a permitted relationship, and then that child will be Jewish. Right? It says the word banim, which says children of the Egyptian, and it says for generations. So the Gemara says, why do I need both of them? Banim means, it doesn't mean the third child of one person will be seen as Jewish. It means the third generation, right? Meaning the grandson, not the third child. And it means not only the generation of the people of Israel who were in the desert, but any any Mitzri, any Egyptian, when he wants to convert, that's when the clock starts, and his grandson will be Jewish. So again, right, the first convert is the first generation. His child is still seen as Egyptian. He's second generation, but then the third child is seen as Jewish. Okay, right. The Gemara tells us that this second generation Egyptian plus what if he marries a first generation Egyptian woman? The child is going to be third generation. So the Gemara tells us we follow the father. If the father is second generation, then that child will be third generation. Okay, but right, there is an opinion that maybe the child is only a second, right, and that maybe we should go according to the mother, right? Again, if in general we say that we go according to the nationality of the mother, why shouldn't we go through the mother, right? And here the Gemara discusses if the child is seen as an extension of the mother, and this is taken a little bit. I don't want to say to an extreme, right? But maybe it talks about, right, if the okay, right. What about if the mother is pregnant and converts and goes to the mikvah? Is that child, right, meaning the fetus, is that fetus seen as part of the mother, and therefore they are, and therefore they're already converted, or does the child need to convert afterwards? Right? We say maybe. Right, maybe we should go according to the mother. So, right, again, if a pregnant woman goes into the mikvah, right, the question is the child Jewish when it's born, right? So maybe it doesn't need to go to the mikvah, and therefore the child seems to be part of the mother, right? That is not necessarily the case. And from here, the Gemara now talks about the 7 nations that lived in Israel at the time when Joshua brought the nation into Israel. God tells the Jewish people that they need to kill all the people of these 7 nations. They are idol worshippers, they're bad influences, and therefore they need to be killed. The Gemara tells us that we follow the father to determine what nation the child is. Excuse me. Again, it's interesting. We usually talk about, right, the mother. If the mother's Jewish, then the child is Jewish. But here, when we're talking about nationality, the Gemara says we go according to the father. And therefore, if the father is one of these nations that need to be killed, so then the child as well needs to be killed. If not, then they could be enslaved and they can stay in Israel. If they right, and again, if someone converts, we go according to the flawed lineage. What does that mean? So let's say you have an Ammoni, right? A man from Ammon, and a female Egyptian, right? So again, he's not allowed to convert, and she's not allowed to convert. But right, so what is the child? So the Gemara tells us that the child is Ammoni. We go according to right, the male child is Ammoni, but the female child is Egyptian, right? Because again, if the female child would be Ammonite, that would make her Jewish, right? Meaning she could convert, and we want to basically take, I guess, the most flawed, I guess, and therefore the son will be Ammoni and the daughter will be Egyptian. The last Mishnah that we're going to do today, the Mishnah tells us that a mamzer, again, a child from one of the forbidden relationships. Again, it's very important to understand. It does not mean illegitimate in any way, in all ways, right? So a child born out of wedlock is not right, from someone who's not married, is not a mamzer, right? A child born out of an adulterous relationship is seen as a mamzer. So the mamzer and the natin, we'll explain the natin in a minute, cannot marry into Israel forever, right? Male or female. The Gemara, so that's the Mishnah. The Gemara tells us that after 10 generations, it's okay for the females of either, right, of the mamzer. It's learned from Ammoni, that the males are always going to be forbidden, but the females eventually, right, it says Ador Asiri, therefore the 10th generation, the females can convert. Now we're going to start a conversation which will mostly finish, but then we'll finish more next week, about the Natin. What is a Natin? The Gemara explains that these are the Givonim. They're a nation that lived in Israel during the time of David. And the Gemara now explains who they are. And the Gemara tells us that David decreed against the Givonim during his time. So what was the story? In that time period, there was a terrible famine, and it lasted for 3 years. And every year, David was trying to see what the people were doing, that there was still this famine. So he asked, right, are you doing idolatry? The next year he asked if it was adultery. The next year he asked, are you not giving charity? And they said, no, we're not doing any of these things. And then David realized that it was because of himself. Right, he was looking to the people, but then he decided to look to himself. And then David asked God, right, parenthetically, the Gemara says, what does it mean he asked God? He went before the priest with the breastplate, the Urim v'Tumim, and the breastplate told him that it's because of 2 things. It's because of Shaul, because he was not eulogized properly, and it was because Shaul killed the people of Nov. The question is, what does this mean? So the Gemara explains that when Shaul killed the people of Nov, the city of priests, in the time when David hid there, which was a terrible, terrible tragedy. But what he didn't realize was that this city also supplied water and food to the Givonim, and then they died as well because he got rid of the entire city, and therefore they died. They suffered because of this. The Gemara also says it's interesting that we're talking about positive sides of Shaul and negative sides of Shaul. And the Gemara says, right, very correctly, that Shaul was good, but he also did some bad things, which is important to understand, that he was, a complicated figure. The top of Daf 79, we'll just do a little bit to just finish the story, and then we'll continue it next week. So the Gemara says that David says to himself, wait a minute, Shaul died more than 12 months ago, and therefore I can't eulogize him now. So what can I do? So David goes to try to appease the Givonim. He realizes that they suffered because of Shaul, and maybe he can help them. So he says to them, what do you want? And they basically say they want to kill 7 descendants of Shaul. And David says, Jewish people have 3 character traits: mercy, bashfulness, and they perform acts of kindness. And you are none of these things, and therefore you, the Givonim, are not seen as Jewish people, and therefore he declared that they couldn't marry into the Jewish people. So that is where we get the decree that a Natin, someone from Givon, from that nation, that region, was not allowed to marry into Israel. And I will leave you with a cliffhanger as to what happens to the children, the descendants of Shaul. It's actually a pretty tragic story, but we will learn it. We will learn it next week. So with that, I wish everyone a Shavua Tov, a great week. Also as we said, Yom Yerushalayim Sameach. That is Saturday night and Sunday. And just wishing everyone all the best and a great week.